Welcome to Good Faith Reads. I'm Cliff Vaughn, media producer at Good Faith Media. At Good Faith Reads, we chat with our book authors at Good Faith Media. We've published a considerable library of titles, and we invite you to check them out at goodfaithmedia.org/shop. Today's guest is Dennis Johnson, author of Life with God, Daily Reflections with Walter Rauschenbusch. Dennis joins us remotely from Lexington, Kentucky. Dennis, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Cliff. It's my pleasure to be here.
We're delighted to have you with us. If you would, begin by just telling our listeners in a few sentences what the book is about, and you might also give people a brief introduction to who Walter Rauschenbusch was as well.
All right. Well, in one sentence, I think I would say that Life with God is a devotional companion for a walk with God in the footsteps of Jesus. And Walter Rauschenbusch is the guide, the spiritual guide for that journey. And it's an informative book. It's also a formative book, not just information, but the goal in my mind has always been spiritual formation of readers, of congregants, of myself as well. So 180 collections of reflections, 6 months of daily reflections about the inward life with God of solitude, the outward life with God of service, and the communal life with God in solidarity. So all three are equally important, and there's not one more valuable than the other. It's not three separate lives, one life in three dimensions, all part of the spiritual life. So that's the book. And Rauschenbusch was a late 19th century, early 20th century Baptist in New York, born in Rochester, pastored a church in New York City. He was not just a pastor, but a seminary professor, a social prophet, a best-selling author, and really what he's most known for is being a leading voice in the social gospel movement during the Gilded Age, that time, early 20th century. Great wealth and extreme poverty, much like we have today. And we can talk more about that also. But Rauschenbusch served a church in New York City, was right on the edge of the notorious Hell's Kitchen neighborhood with this vast influx of German immigrants, the poverty, the unemployment, the exploitation, the crammed tenements, the disease-infested tenements, alcoholism, prostitution, death everywhere, children's death, primarily, especially, grabbed him. And his church was in that setting. And that's where he really began to hammer out his faith and his social passion for a transformation of society, the salvation of society. He said, I came there as a young pastor ready to save souls. And I discovered there was a whole lot more to save than just souls. So his faith really was shaped there. And one piece about Rauschenbusch that really touches me that I think people don't remember or don't know about, that he really sacrificed his health for his flock. He'd been there 2 years. In 1888, there was a severe influenza pandemic. The homeless were dying on the streets of New York, and he became ill himself. He got notice of a parishioner who was really ill, and he got out of bed too soon to go to this parishioner, and the effect of getting out of bed too soon began to affect his hearing. He noticed he'd already had hearing problems, but it got much worse until he lost his hearing at age 25. He thought, what good is a deaf pastor? So he resigned from the church. And Rochester Seminary, his alma mater, offered him a faculty position. And he thought being a deaf professor is no more helpful than being a deaf pastor. So he turned it down. The interesting thing is the church rejected his resignation.
I read the story in the book about him losing his hearing, which
Yeah.
was news to me. I did not know that about Rauschenbusch, but it really sort of colors how I now think about him and what he did with the rest of his life.
He said he entered a very lonely stage at that point. And his students, when he did end up at Rochester Seminary as a professor, thought it deepened his spirituality. He married about 5 or 6 years after he never heard his wife's voice or his children's voices, unless you were right in his face screaming at him. And even that wasn't the true voice, you know. His students, his seminary professor assistants, would stand behind him, write a note of the question asked, and pass it up to him so he could read what was being discussed. So it really did have a profound effect on him. Uh, who knows what it would have been like had he not lost his hearing,
Yeah.
but
Well,
he did.
this is actually your second book about Rauschenbusch. This one is Life with God. The first was Life in God. Do you remember the moment in your life when you first heard about Rauschenbusch, or when you realized that you had such a deep and abiding interest in Rauschenbusch?
Well, I can't remember the moment other than it was during seminary. I went to Northern Baptist Seminary in Chicago. I should back up a bit. I grew up Presbyterian, went to a Franciscan college, taught school for a few years, hated every day of it, um, and really reconfirmed my call to ministry. And as a Presbyterian, went to a Baptist seminary. Graduated a Baptist, by the way. But I heard of Rauschenbusch that we were never required to read Rauschenbusch. He was mentioned. Even Torbit, in his History of Baptists, mentions Rauschenbusch 5 times. That's it. So, but I had been reading. I really was drawn during seminary and in my ministry to spirituality and spiritual life. My ministry was really focused on worship and spiritual formation. I'd read all the classics and all the great spiritual writers, and from Celtic, contemporary, uh, Evelyn Underhill, Merton, I mean, Quakers, everybody. And I thought, I really need to find somebody in my own Baptist tradition who can help shape me. I thought, well, I've heard of Rauschenbusch, let me try that. So I got a copy of his book, Prayers of the Social Awakening. Originally, it was called For God and the People. Um, and I was hooked. Those prayers are absolutely stunning, from 1910. So then I went on to his other well-known books, and I would underline and bracket and everything I've highlighted and bracketed in all the that was 40 years ago. I started this. All of that highlighting and bracketing and note taking, that's what ended up in these 2 books. If it spoke to me, I thought it may speak to others
Yeah.
as well.
What do you what do you think or suspect about Rauschenbusch that speaks most to people now, perhaps?
I would imagine his trailblazing work with the social gospel movement. That's because that's all we talk about. But there was a whole lot more to him than just that. I mean, that passion came from somewhere. And it was this deep, deep spirituality of his. Um, he said to his little church in New York City when his last sermon was like July 5th, 1897, on a Sunday night. And the last sentence, I think I quote it in the book, is he has tried to lead his people to Jesus. And if I leave and hear you keep following in his footsteps, I will be happy. And I think that's Rauschenbusch. He wants to lead us to Christ, a deeper life with Christ, faithfulness to walking in his footsteps, which leads us into a deeper life with God. And I think that's where we hear a lot about the social gospel movement and Rauschenbusch, justifiably. But there's a whole different side and more to him than just that. And I'm hoping people will discover that in the book.
We'll be right back with more Good Faith Reads.
Do you have a book idea, outline, or manuscript? Good Faith Media is always accepting book proposals. Our authors engage with an experienced team of editors, designers, and marketers to produce and sell books on a variety of topics. We publish in print and digital and help promote your work through the many resources of Good Faith Media. If you have a book proposal you'd like to run by us, head over to goodfaithmedia.org to get started. That's goodfaithmedia.org.
Welcome back to Good Faith Reads. I'm Cliff Vaughn, media producer at Good Faith Media. We're talking with Dennis Johnson, author of Life with God, Daily Reflections with Walter Rauschenbusch. Dennis, let's talk a little bit about writing process. Some of the people listening to us are themselves thinking about writing a book and may wonder about the process. You've written several books. What can you share about your own writing process, either with this book or just the writing process in general? Do you tend to give yourself daily mandates, or how does it work? Do you ever suffer from writer's block? Just talk a little bit about process.
Well, the two Rauschenbusch books, I think them more as an assembling process than a writing process. I wrote the introductions, but otherwise it's all Rauschenbusch. For me, the process was more what to include. And it took two books to do all of what I wanted to include. And then when I decided what I wanted to include, how to format it. So I chose for each, the 180 reflections in each of the two books. I began choosing a scripture passage that in my mind dovetailed with the content of that quotation from Rauschenbusch. And then I thought, well, let's really make this a Baptist book in many ways. Who translated the New Testament? A Baptist who was a contemporary of Rauschenbusch. Well, there were two that I chose. Helen Barrett Montgomery in her 1924 New Testament translation. If your folks haven't heard of Helen Barrett Montgomery, she was also a citizen of Rochester, the first woman to translate the New Testament from the original language into English and have it published, 1924. The first woman president of a Protestant denomination, the Northern Baptist Convention, my denomination. So I used her translations for the scripture passages, and Edgar Goodspeed from the University of Chicago, his 1925 translation, both for Baptist, both for contemporaries of Rauschenbusch. So for me, the process was, here's the Rauschenbusch, choose the scripture, cite the translation, include the reference in the passage from Rauschenbusch, and then end with one of his prayers. All the prayers in the first book are from his book of prayers, Prayers of the Social Awakening. The thing about the second book, Life with God, almost 90% of the prayers in this book have never been published by Rauschenbusch. I found them in the archives in Atlanta. They are his chapel prayers at Rochester Seminary. Again, they're just as stunning as the published prayers. So that's one of the things that makes the book really unique. It's not just a unique way to present Rauschenbusch, but a lot of the material in this book has never been published before.
Yeah.
So you're reading prayers that haven't been heard for over 100 years.
Yeah.
So the other part of the process was, how much do I tinker with the language? And in this book with Rausch, second book, I did drop the these, the thous. I did keep the word beseech. I like that word beseech. It's a good word. And then I, of course, tried to make it more general, gender inclusive, and in terms of God and humanity. So it was more a curating, assembling process than a writing process.
Well, and what you chose to include, as I was reading Rauschenbusch, I was struck by how much he referenced the universe, science, geography, economics. He had both an expansive vision, but also he wrote in specifics. some examples. Page 22, his writing called The Castle of My Soul. He mentions Venus, Saturn, Orion, Cassiopeia in an entry called A Psalm of Great Cities on page 143. He mentions Rome, Cairo, Constantinople, Vienna. He was philosopher and poet, but grounded these large-scale claims in this wonderful specificity. I thought it just really made his writing pop. I was wondering what struck you, or what continues to strike you about his writing.
Well, that is one of the dimensions. He is so, the word you use is expansive. I mean, he is a philosopher. He is a poet. I mean, his language is just so eloquent. And that's, for the book, I took his prose passages and formatted them as poetry to help read them more reflectively, as well as he is really a poet.
Yeah.
Elegant language. He is a mystic. He is a prophet. He sees a big picture, and yet the intimacy of everyday life. The kingdom is big, and it's about the daily bread. You know, um, for Walter, everything is connected to God through the living Christ. Uh, the kingdom touches everything. Uh, that impresses me. That the values of the kingdom embrace creation and creatures and the cosmos and our little lives, and that all humanity is knit together in a holy web of love and solidarity. Uh, and when he was dying of cancer at age 56, can you imagine if he lived 20, 25 more years? Dies of cancer in age 56 in 1918. He wrote poems and brief reflections to express his faith at the end of his life. And one of those poems is about a little gate you pass through to enter into the presence of God. And his great grandson, Paul Rauschenbusch, who wrote the foreword for the book, quotes that poem in his foreword. And Rauschenbusch said, in the presence of God, and he said, big things become small, and small things become great. The near becomes far, and the future becomes near. And then I love this line, the lowly and despised is shot through with glory. That's Rauschenbusch. I mean, the vastness of the universe and the intimacy of. Well, one of the reflections in the book is about. He said, "What is the real thing? What's really important? What's the real thing in life?" Among the things that he names, he says the real thing is to exploit no one and love everyone, to be at peace with your God, with yourself, and with your siblings in the human family. And then he includes in the real things to sing with joy at the sight of a sunset, or an autumn creeper, or a happy child. He said that's the real thing.
Yeah.
But I think from Orion to an autumn creeper, it's all part of kingdom.
Yeah, the writing that talks about the little gate and experiencing God and the way the future comes near, all of that. When I read that, I remember in preparation for the interview, I went and I read it to my wife. I said, listen to this language. That's how striking I found it, that I just had to share it. An important note to all of our listeners, we at Good Faith Media are always accepting book proposals. Our authors engage with an experienced team of editors, designers, and marketers to produce and sell books on a variety of topics. If you have a book proposal you'd like to run by us, head on over to goodfaithmedia.org. Dennis, I thought the book just kept getting better and better, which is great for a book, as in a movie or a TV show. I just thought it got better and better. And I thought the third section, called Life with God in Solidarity, it really felt current. And here are some titles of some of the writing. Page 141, A Responsive Prayer for All Who Labor. Page 147, History and the Dominant Classes. Page 153, The Sociable Jesus. Page 154, Our Business. Page 170, private interest and chronic corruption. I could go on.
Yes.
Rauschenbusch writes throughout not only of Jesus's ethic of love, but he also writes a lot about justice and power, and it felt like he wrote it this morning. Tell us what's up in the third section of the book and how Rauschenbusch still seems so current.
Well, I hear that a lot, Cliff. Those are, you read the first book. That's one of the first things they would say. This seems so contemporary from a century ago. And I kind of want to add the word at the beginning of the sentence, sadly.
Yeah.
It could have been written today.
Yeah.
Or this morning. We've got a lot of work still to do. The Gilded Age has become the Golden Age in the vocabulary of our leaders.
Yeah.
And the problems are just as real now. And that's what to me makes it so timely. I mean, he lived through that. He saw a path through it to help redeem society. And obviously, the forces of the principalities and powers have not surrendered at this point completely. But he devoted his early life. He grew up in a German pietistic family. He only knew about the Bible and Jesus what he was taught. He said, I want to find out who is Jesus for myself. So he dug into the Gospels. He wanted to encounter the biblical Jesus. And when he had that encounter experience, he identified three convictions, three values that are the pattern of Jesus. He said, the sacredness of life and the worth of every human being. That's one value of Jesus. The second conviction of Jesus is the solidarity of the human family. And the third conviction of Jesus is the obligation of the strong, he said, the haves, to stand up for all those whose life is impaired or whose place in the human family is being denied, the have-nots. Rauschenbusch said those are the three convictions. Those are the convictions which every Christian and every congregation needs to commit to and be faithful to. The worth of every human being, the solidarity of the human family, and the obligation, the spiritual and social obligation of the haves to stand up for and lift up the have-nots. Yeah. This is not a devotional, Cliff, for the faint of heart. It is not a happy clappy Christianity, if that's what you're looking for. It is not baby food devotions. It disrupts a lot of things. He disturbs a lot of things. What is justice? What is peace? Who is my neighbor? I sat on a plane with a young guy about a year ago who dashed in at the last minute, took the seat beside me. I thought I was going to have a good free seat for a change, but it didn't. And we got to talking, and he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Oh, here we go." And I said, I'm a retired pastor. And he said, "You're a retired pastor?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I got a million questions for you." And he just started talking. He had been visiting his father in Lexington, who's dying, and he had to go back home now to Florida. And he said, "My first question is, what is the meaning of life?" And I thought, it's only a 45-minute flight now to Atlanta. But I said, "Well, that's a good question. What do you think?" And he said, "I think he said, I had a massive heart attack. I'm 40 years old. When you're near death, you think about a lot of things." And he said, "I came to decide the meaning of my life is to empty myself." I said, "That's a good answer. it's pretty Christ-like. It reminds me of a mentor of mine. I told him Rauschenbusch's name, who said, sin is being so full of ourselves, greed, self-centeredness. Salvation is to empty ourselves for the sake of others. He said, what's the name of that book you wrote? He said, that was To Live in God. And he said, I ordered it just now on my phone. So, but I think, yeah, it's so contemporary because just last night, a shooting in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
A dear friend of mine is a pastor in South Minneapolis, the Baptist church. And now taking away COVID shots and immunization, possibly. And I thought of Rauschenbusch's line, death rules because love and solidarity do not rule.
Hmm.
A lot of people in power do a lot of the good things if they would let love and solidarity rule.
Yeah.
And not corporate greed or power.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me that Rauschenbusch's proximity to pain, both his own and other people's, really informed what he had to say and pray, and he just did it with such facility with words that you've captured so well here. Last question. Could you read for us a sentence or two from the book that you think is critical for listeners to hear, either because you think it's representative of the book in some way, or because you just think it's especially important for people to hear now?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And it's hard to decide which one to go with. And I know you warmed up a lot to section 3.
It wasn't the only section, but it did keep getting better.
I know,
and better.
but it's really it's so contemporary, that section, and informative. I'm choosing something from the first section, solidarity, solitude.
Yeah.
This is from something that has never been published before by Rauschenbusch. And just a couple of sentences, and then the prayer that goes with it. It's on page 49. And he says, there are still ardent hearts, impatient of the slow, toiling ascent of a faithful, humble Christian life. Hearts that long for some mighty sanctifying power to carry them as with the sweep of an eagle's wings out of the depressed, up and down experience of the average Christian into the clear air of a higher life with God. There are still some who would fain draw aside the veil of the finite and attempt to behold the infinite one face to face. And then his prayer, never published, from 1910, a chapel prayer. O God, you have been at our right hand and our left, before us and behind us, above us and below us, about us and within us, and every fiber of our mystic nature has been a quiver with God. Who doesn't want a life a quiver with God? Cliff, I think that's, to me, what Brother Walter can help us into that experience if we listen.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dennis and Walter Rauschenbusch, for helping us pull apart the veil of the finite. Our guest today on Good Faith Reads has been Dennis Johnson, author of Life with God, Daily Reflections with Walter Rauschenbusch. This book, along with many other titles, is available at goodfaithmedia.org. Dennis, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Cliff.